It's your boy the Killer B back with another top 10 list. As always, this list represents my miscellaneous ramblings, memories of my childhood, cool things I saw in car magazines 20, 25, 30 years ago. It's in no particular order, and if I was to do this again tomorrow, there might be different cars on the list. Number 1, 1987 Oldsmobile Aerotech. What can I say? This was essentially a rebodied March 84C Indy car, and really it was a test bed and a marketing gimmick for Oldsmobile's new Quad 4 engine, or General Motors' new Quad 4 engine. They put a big turbocharger on it, boosted the holy hell out of it, and had AJ Foyt driving around a racetrack and break a bunch of records. It was cool. It was great to look at. It was not ever going to be a street car. I mean, you know, it was what it was. It was a true concept or prototype and not ever meant to be a street car. Number 2, 1986 Corvette Indy. Much like the Oldsmobile Aerotech, the Corvette Indy was a car meant to show us what a potential mid-engine Corvette would look like. And even in 1986, the idea of the Corvette becoming mid-engine was not a new thing. It's something that goes back to Zoroarkis Duntov, I believe. I just thought this thing was pretty cool. You know, the dual cam, V8, all-wheel drive, the bubble canopy. Some of the styling features did eventually work their way into the Camaro of all cars, but it was just a cool thing to see laid out in the magazine. It's like, ooh, a four-wheel drive mid-engine Corvette. How cool is that? Number 3 on the list. This one's sort of an oddball, but I loved it. The Yamaha Ox9911. What happens when you take a 3.5 liter V12 Formula 1 engine and build an F1 for the street exotic around it? If your name is Yamaha, nothing happens. Absolutely nothing. The Ox9911 was unique with its Japanese design, its British F1 chassis, and detuned race engine. 3 prototypes were built, but ultimately the project was scrapped. And unlike McLaren, which did eventually build their F1 for the street, the Yamaha Ox9911 is something relegated to museums and afterthoughts. Up next, the Nissan Mid Four from 1985. The Mid Four was a 4-wheel drive, 4-wheel steering, V6 powered concept car. Never made it to production, but its 4-wheel drive system was the predecessor of the Atessa system that was later used in the R32 Skyline GTR. And the Hikas rear steering system obviously would appear on a variety of Nissans. Skyline, 240SX, Sylvia, 300ZX, Fairlady, whatever you want to call it. Some of that technology did eventually make its way into Nissan street cars, which is a good thing. There was a Mid Four 2, but we're not going to talk about that because I didn't think it was very good looking. But at least it did have a turbo VG30 in it, as opposed to the normally aspirated VG30 that was in the original Mid Four. Up next on the list, the Chevrolet Express from 1987. Not to be confused with the Chevrolet Express van that exists now. I'm talking about the concept car from 1987. It was a wild piece of kit. I mean, this thing was powered by a turbine engine, which for a kid who wanted to be an aerospace engineer, anything powered by a gas turbine was just, I mean, that was the bee's knees as far as I was concerned. Especially at that age. I mean, when this thing came out, I was 13 years old. And at that age, anything that didn't look like a regular street car was sexy to me. This thing had a glass canopy that popped open instead of actual doors. And it did make a quick cameo in Back to the Future 2 as one of the future cars from quote-unquote 2015. That's still funny to me. It had drive-by-wire controls, instrumentation, and dash-mounted screens, backup cameras. Some of these things that we have in cars now that in 1987 were distant dreams and are now our everyday reality. Up next, a lot of GM on this list. I don't know how that happened. Yeah, I do, because GM used to build a lot of really cool concepts, even if those things never made it to production. 1985 Buick Wildcat. McLaren built 3.8 liter V6 turbo, mid-engine, wild styling, all-wheel drive, nothing that you would associate with Buick. I mean, even when Buick had the Grand National, had the Regal Grand National, which was a pretty fast car in its day, Buick was not necessarily known for performance automobiles. That was more of a Chevy, Pontiac kind of thing. Oldsmobile and Buick were not necessarily the performance divisions of GM. Which is not to say they didn't have the occasional high performer, but neither one of those brands had a legit sports car in the 80s or 90s. That said, the Buick Wildcat was, as concept cars go, was pretty wild. And the funny part is the concept car would only do 70 miles an hour. For whatever reason, they artificially limited it to 70 miles an hour, which to me is just hilarious. Number 7 on my list, the Bugatti EB110 prototype, not the production car, the prototype. And the EB110 went through a lot of teething and was a long simmering project before it became an actual production car. So there are several variations of it. In particular, I'm talking about the Marcello Gandini designed version, which may have been called the DMD 80. I don't know. There's a lot of conflicting information about the different variations of the EB110 as it was in development. This particular version I thought was spectacular, and I liked it better than what eventually came to production. Number 8 on my list, the Ford Probe 4. The Ford Probe 4 was a concept car that advances the state-of-the-art aerodynamics at Ford Motor Company, really moving it to a new level. This thing had low ride height, it had wheel skirts, it had speed-sensitive height and angle of attack. For the 1980s, for the early 1980s, it was everything that an aerodynamicist would ever want in a car, even if it wasn't necessarily a good car. The radiator and air conditioning compressor were located at the back to eliminate the high drag radiator opening in the front. It had a smooth belly pan that limited airflow under the car. It had very skinny tires that were designed to produce low road drag. The emblems were flush with the skin of the car. The mirrors were ferried in and swept back. The engine was canted over to the side so that there was a low hood. It was a really cool platform for developing technology, even if only just the very bare minimum of that technology eventually made it into the Ford Probe production car, which was an entirely different thing. Number 9 on the list, the Lamborghini Portofino. So for those that don't know, Chrysler owned Lamborghini between 1987 and 1994. And during that period, a prototype car, concept car called the Portofino came about. Now it actually, some people will call it a Lamborghini, some people call it a Chrysler Lamborghini or a Lamborghini Chrysler. It in fact had both emblems on it. It had the Chrysler 5-point star with the Lamborghini bull superimposed in it as a hood emblem. So take that for what you will. The interesting thing about it is that this car was designed in-house, I believe, by Chrysler, but built by an Italian coach building firm on a stretched out Lamborghini Joppa chassis, including the engine. It was rear-wheel drive, it was mid-engine, had a 3.5 liter V8, 5-speed manual transmission, and the interesting thing is it had scissor doors, front and rear. The front's open to the front, the rear's open to the rear. It was low, it was wide, and it actually, the design elements from the Portofino eventually made it into Chrysler's LH body vehicles. Number 10 on the list, the Bertone Emotion. Now again, this is one of those deals where an Italian styling house designed a car, and I don't think Lotus commissioned them to do this. I think they designed a car and said, this is what we think the next generation Lotus Esprit should look like. And that was in 1991. It never made it to production. It was truly just a styling exercise, and when Bertone went bankrupt, all the existing bodies were sold, but it was a great looking car. And you know, as I sit here today in 2020, it would still be a good looking Lotus Esprit today. So that tells you how cutting edge the design was back in 1991. And sadly, Lotus, the Lotus Esprit went out of production, but this would have been a worthy successor to the 4-cylinder, 2.2-liter powered Esprit, even though eventually the Esprit got a V8, which is a whole nother story. The Bertone Emotion did not run, as far as I can understand. It was a styling exercise, and even though it was based on a Lotus chassis, I don't think it had full running gear. It was just a really cool car, and I wish that it had come to fruition. Honorable mentions. Okay, I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I'll do it anyway. The Dodge Turbo Interceptor, also known as the Dodge M4S, was a PPG pace car for IndyCar races and was the quote-unquote star of the movie The Wraith, although it really wasn't, because the cars that were used in the movie were actually dune buggies that were rebodied to resemble the M4S, but they did not use the actual M4S in the movie because of the need for stunts and some other things. Movie productions being what they are, cars break down, cars are smashed, cars are jumped over things, cars are blown up, and so they used all replicas. The one scene where the actual M4S was in the movie was apparently cut, but there was one scene. The car was shipped out to Arizona and filmed for a day, and apparently that scene was cut from the movie, from the final cut of the movie. But this was an actual pace car that they did use for some IndyCar races, and I thought it was just a really cool looking vehicle. And my other honorable mention is the GM Ultralight, which was sort of a pod car, but it was featured in the movie Demolition Man. So it made the International Car Show circuit, and it made all the magazines, and then it ended up in the back, well, not in the background, it was the featured, it was actually their police cruiser in the movie Demolition Man, which a lot of GM concept cars appeared in for some reason or another. I don't know if they underwrote part of the cost of the movie or what, but so that's my 2 honorable mentions, and there's only 2. Sorry. That's my list. Let me know what you think about it. Thank you for watching Cocktails and Crankshafts. If you enjoy my content, please like, share, and subscribe. Be sure to hit the bell icon, and we'll see you soon with new content.